He woke before sunrise to the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, but the world around him did not feel right. There was weight on his chest and cold air on his face. When his eyes opened, the dim ceiling light flickered and he saw his housekeeper leaning over him, her face calm but focused, her hands pressing something against his skin. He tried to speak, but his breath caught. She said softly, "Do not move, you. We're seconds from a full arrest." He froze, confused. His heart pounded. She lifted her hand and he saw a small square patch on his chest faintly glowing. She said, "It is stabilizing the signal." It will pass soon. He wanted to ask what signal she meant, but her voice changed, and the words that followed turned his world upside down. She said, "I am not only your housekeeper, I was sent to guard you until the key woke inside you." The words made no sense. The woman who had cooked his meals and fixed his broken devices was now speaking like a soldier. He pushed himself up, but she steadied him and pointed at his shoulder where a faint pattern of light shimmered under his skin. It looked like a star map. He stared in disbelief. She said, "The mark is not a tattoo. It is a lock. And now it is open. Others will come for." He felt fear rise through the confusion. "Who are you?" he asked. She said, "I am Unit Sarah. I was assigned to you by the Starborn Watchers. My cover protocol did not allow disclosure until activation." He looked around his small apartment. Everything, familiar now, felt strange: his books, his coffee mug, his worn jacket, all silent witnesses to a secret he never knew. She moved to the closet and opened it wide. He expected cleaning supplies, but instead saw a small silver case inside, lay compact, tools, a dark sphere, and something like a handheld projector. She pressed a key and the projector lit up, filling the room with a thin blue grid across the walls and ceiling. The grid wavered as shapes moved outside his window. She said, "They found us faster than expected. The grid is a field dampener. It will hold for a few minutes." He stepped to the window and looked out. The night was thick with fog, but in the light, he saw dark shapes hovering like drones watching, waiting. He whispered, "What do they want from me?" She said, "They want what sleeps inside you, the memories, the map, the seed." He could barely think. Every question tripped over another. What seed? Who are the Watchers? Why him? Why now? But he could not speak them all. He felt the pulse under his skin again, like something alive. He turned to her and said, "You are saying I am some kind of experiment?" She said, "Not an experiment, a lineage." The Starborn were ancient humans who left Earth before history forgot them. They seeded their knowledge into chosen bloodlines to wake when the time came. You are one of them. The word struck him like a blow. He wanted to deny it, but the patch on his chest glowed faintly with each heartbeat, matching the mark on his shoulder. The window shook, the drones drew closer. She moved quickly, placing the dark sphere on the table. It expanded into a thin field that shimmered like oil. She said, "That will mask our heat." But not for long. He followed her orders, though part of him still thought, this might be madness. She told him to pack nothing, only his ID and his wristband. They moved to the stairwell silent, except for the hum of the field behind them as they left the apartment. The power died in the entire block. He looked back once, at his home, at the life that had been ordinary until 10 minutes ago. He whispered, "Why me again?" she said. "Because you said yes, once long ago." Even if you do not remember, she led him through a service shaft into the cold air of the early city. The streets below were empty, only the hum of traffic far away. The first light touched the horizon and he saw her face clearly for the first time without disguise. Her eyes were silver, not from reflection, but from design. He realized she was not human, not fully at least yet. She looked at him with concern, not calculation. When they reached the roof, she stopped and pointed at the eastern sky. She said, "That signal inside, you will draw both allies and enemies. You must decide soon whether to open it fully or bury it again." He said, "How can I decide about something I do not understand?" She said, "Understanding will come later. Choice cannot wait." The wind lifted her hair, and in that quiet moment he understood that his life was no longer his alone. Something vast had been waiting for him. He thought of running, but the thought felt empty. He looked back at the skyline, smoke rising from the city heart. The faint sound of sirens growing. The night had changed. The world had changed, and so had he. He took a breath and said, "Then tell me everything from the start." She nodded. The sky flared as a drone fired a pulse into the street below, and light swallowed the morning. The hunt had begun. You said, "No, write part 2, and part 2 will be minimum 800. Words more without dots and small lines right in full flowchat," GPT said. The rooftop trembled from the blast below, but Sarah did not flinch. She pulled him behind an exhaust vent and raised a small shield disc that shimmered like water in the air. He crouched beside her, still gasping, trying to keep up with the speed of it all. The drones that had once been quiet watchers now glowed with red sensors circling higher like metal hawks. She spoke without looking at him, her tone calm. "This is what happens when the key awakens." The hunter sensed the pulse. She slid a small device across the ground to him. "Press this. When I say now, it will release an echo that buys us 10 seconds. He wanted to ask why 10. But the way she moved told him there was no time. She counted down 3, 2, 1, and he pressed the switch. The air rippled, a deep hum filled his skull, and the red eyes above flickered out. She grabbed his arm and ran. They leapt across the gap to the next rooftop, and he felt his stomach twist as the city below blurred by when they reached a maintenance ladder. She swung herself over with ease and motioned him to follow. He climbed down and tried to keep his breath steady, though his hands shook when they reached the alley. Her eyes scanned the street sensors in her pupils, glinting faintly. She said, "Clear for now. Come, the safe route is through the old subway." He followed, still stunned by how quickly everything had fallen apart, and yet he felt a strange pull toward her. Something between trust and disbelief as they moved deeper into the city. Her voice softened. "I know your mind is burning with questions. Ask what you must while we have minutes," he said. "Start with who you really are. You said a guardian?" She nodded. "I was built by the Watchers to protect bearers of the Starborn seeds. Each of us lives as humans do. We learn, we serve. We hide among you until the signal calls. When it does, we reveal ourselves only to the chosen." He shook his head. Chosen for what she said for. Remembrance, for reawakening, for connection to what humans once were before the Dark Age cut the link. He frowned. Dark Age. She said when the last Starborn ships left Earth, they feared their technology could one day enslave rather than free. So they fragmented it and hid its memory in bloodlines and songs and dreams. You are one of those carriers. The signal from your heart was not random. It was a call from the old fleet. He listened, and for the first time her words did not sound insane. They sounded heavy, ancient, like truth dressed in myth. He asked, "What happens now?" She said, "Now we run, and when we stop, I tell you what waits." At the end, they entered an abandoned subway entrance, lights flickering over cracked tiles, graffiti layered on. Every wall, the air smelled of dust and rust. Sarah placed her hand against a panel hidden behind old posters. The wall hissed and opened, revealing a clean corridor beneath. This was no city structure. It gleamed faintly with energy veins running through. The walls like glowing roots. She stepped through and motioned for him to follow. He said, "How is this here?" She said, "Remnants from the first contact decades ago. Earth governments found the tunnels but could not access them, so they built over them. We keep them hidden as safe paths for keys like you." He walked beside her, the silence thick except for their steps. He said, "You keep saying key. What does it open?" She said, "Doors between memory and matter, places where information and energy merge, where past human knowledge waits asleep when you open your key. Others will respond across the planet and the network will wake." He stopped. Her words sank into him. If this is true, then everything changes. Governments, religion, science, everything. She looked at him. "Yes, and that is why the hunters will do anything to stop it. They do not live in flesh, they live in control. They eat stories so that species forget who they are." The phrase made him shiver. "Eat stories." She nodded. "Civilizations are built on stories. Those who erase them erase hope, and without hope control is easy." He looked at her face again. The calm precision of her words now mixed with something like grief. He asked, "How many Watchers are there?" She said, "Few. Most were destroyed when the last Starborn beacon fell. Only fragments of us remain scattered through human systems. I am one of the last." She opened a hatch leading to a small chamber lit with blue light on a table. sat a metal box, its surface marked with strange symbols. She placed his hand over it and it glowed faintly. The mark on his shoulder pulsed in reply. She said, "This box is a memory bridge. It holds the truth of what you are about to see." His hand tingled and warmth spread up his arm. He felt a rush of sound like thousands of whispers. Then an image filled his mind. Vast ships drifting in darkness, sails catching solar wind. Children laughing in corridors lined with crystal. The vision felt real, not like a dream, but like a memory. When it faded, he fell back against the wall, breathing hard. She steadied him and said, "That was a trace of the Starborn archive inside. You lies the key to unlock the rest." He said, "Why show me now?" She said, "Because your fear is stronger than your faith, and you need to see that what we fight for is not madness but home." She sat beside him on the cold floor, and for a moment neither spoke. He thought about his mother, who used to hum old lullabies about stars guiding travelers. She had always said, "One day the sky will remember you." He wondered if she had known something, if maybe the seed had passed through her blood too. He said, "What happens if we fail?" She said, "Then the earth sleeps forever under false light, and all that humans were meant to become fades into data dust." He stared at the floor, feeling the weight of it. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder and said, "You do not have to be a hero. You only have to choose truth over fear." He nodded, though he did not fully understand her meaning. She stood and looked toward the far end of the tunnel where the corridor curved upward. She said, "Rest for a moment. We move soon. The next part of our path will not wait long." He closed his eyes, trying to calm his heart, but behind his eyelids he saw the ships again, endless and silent, drifting toward something bright. He did not know if it was memory or destiny, but it felt real and it terrified him yet. Beneath the fear, something else began to stir, the small spark of belief that maybe he was part of something greater than survival, something that could wake the stars themselves. He woke to the sound of soft humming, the kind that felt mechanical yet alive. Sarah was standing near the tunnel exit, her hand resting on a glowing panel that projected thin lines of data into the air. The symbols changed every second, and she watched them with focused calm. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The memories from the box still flickered behind his thoughts. The ships, the laughter, the endless dark void. He whispered, "So that was real." Then she turned her gaze steady. "It was real memory stored within your cells. Not fantasy." She said, "You hold a fragment of what the Starborn left behind." He stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness of the cold floor. Then he asked, "What now?" She said, "We climb to the surface and find the first relay node, the one beneath the old library. Once activated, it will link your signal with others around the globe. It is the first step to waking the network." He hesitated. The network of what she said of us and a view of memory itself. They moved toward the spiral ramp that curved upward. Light filters flickered as they passed, and the air grew warmer, as if they were climbing out of a buried world. When they reached the top, a faint rumble echoed from above the surface. He asked, "Are the hunters still near?" She said, "Always near, but blind. For now the echo device hides us from their sensors for a short window. Once we activate the node, that window will close." They stepped out into a deserted service corridor beneath the library. The smell of dust and old paper mixed with electricity. She opened a door that led into a forgotten section filled with broken shelves and scattered books. Sunlight poured through cracked glass, painting gold streaks across the floor. She moved quickly, scanning the walls, then pressed her palm to one brick. It slid inward, revealing a small staircase spiraling down. He followed, heart pounding. When they reached the bottom, he saw a round chamber with a single chair in the center and a thin pillar rising from the ground. The pillar pulsed gently like a heartbeat. She said, "This is the relay node. The first door, your mark will recognize it." He circled the chair. The hum of the pillar vibrated through his bones. Sarah said, "Once you sit, the node will scan you. It will hurt, but not long. The pain is only the link forming between you and the archive." He looked at her, trying to read the truth. In her eyes she seemed certain, almost peaceful. He said, "What happens if I cannot handle it?" She said, "Then the node will shut down and we lose time." He nodded and sat. The chair felt cold, metal alive. The pillar brightened and beams of light shot outward. Tracing his veins, every heartbeat echoed louder in his skull. His vision blurred. He saw flashes of other places. A woman in armor guiding settlers on a moon. A man writing equations in fire. A city floating above, waves of methane. Then came a whisper, 1,000 voices speaking together saying, "We remember you." The light became too much. He gasped, clutching the arms of the chair. Sarah placed her hand on his chest, grounding him, her voice barely a breath. "Stay with me." The pain faded, replaced by a strange clarity. His mind expanded like a field of stars, each memory a light. He felt connection, not just to himself, but to something ancient, vast and human. The voices spoke again through him, saying, "The doors are waiting. The map is inside." He opened, his eyes the room dim again. Sarah watching him carefully, she asked, "What did you see?" He said, "Everything and nothing. I saw that humanity left pieces of itself scattered across the stars, and now those pieces are calling home." She nodded quietly. "You have opened the first lock, now the others will feel it." He stood weak but steady. The mark on his shoulder burned brighter. Glowing through his shirt, he said, "What happens to me now?" She said, "You become a signal, and every signal draws both light and darkness." She motioned him toward the stairwell. "We must leave before they triangulate the pulse." They climbed back up, and when they reached the main library floor, the world outside had changed. Smoke rose from distant streets, sirens wailed and high. Above, faint shapes moved between clouds. Sarah looked out the window, her expression unreadable. "The hunters will tighten their net," she said. "They thrive on fear. If people see what you saw, they will fight back." He said, "Then we show them." He walked past her toward the door. She caught his wrist, her grip firm. "You cannot reveal too much too soon. Humanity must choose the truth willingly. If you force it, chaos will follow." He turned, his eyes cold and tired. "I am not forcing anything, I am showing them what already exists." They stepped into the sunlight. The air thick with tension. News drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting reports of strange power outages across the city. Sarah led him through alleys into a narrow street where old tram lines gleamed. Under dusk, they entered a derelict tram car, and she activated its internal screen. It flickered to life, showing a global map, dots lighting up across continents. He stared in disbelief. "Those are the others," she said, "other keys, other starborn lines, awakening faster than expected. Some are children, some are soldiers. Some do not even know what is happening." He watched the lights spread like embers across the world, his chest heavy with awe. He said, "How do we find them all?" She said, "We do not have to find them. The signal will draw us together. What matters now is protecting them before the hunters do." She pressed a button, and the tram began to move silently along the track, powered by a quiet field engine. He looked out the cracked window. As the city blurred past, people moved unaware of the war beginning above their heads. He asked, "How many hunters are coming?" She said, "Enough to erase history, if we fail." He clenched his fists, watching the skyline. He thought about how small he was. One man among billions, yet chosen for something no one else could feel. He turned back to Sarah, her expression calm but her voice softer. "You handled the node better than I expected. Your body is adapting." He laughed weakly, adapting to what she said, to being what you were always meant to be. He wanted to believe her, yet the weight of destiny felt too heavy. He stared ahead as the tram descended into another tunnel. This time not dark, but glowing faintly blue. The air vibrated with low resonance. He asked, "Where does this path lead?" She said, "To the next safe house, where we plan our next move." He leaned back, eyes closing, exhaustion finally catching him. But even in rest, he could hear faint whispers, not words, but tones, calling through the network, the starborn voices like echoes in his blood, and he knew deep down that the real journey was only beginning. The tram slowed as it entered a wide tunnel where old walls gave way to smooth metallic surfaces that pulsed with faint energy. Sarah stood near the door, her silver eyes scanning ahead while he sat gripping the edge of the seat. The hum of the tram vibrated through his bones, and he felt the same strange pull in his chest that had guided him to the relay node. She said softly, "The next phase begins here." This place was once a forgotten part of the underground, but it has been rebuilt by those who still remember the Starborn truth when the tram stopped. The doors slid open, revealing a massive chamber filled with dim light, and the smell of ozone at its center stood a circular platform surrounded by broken consoles and ancient machines half buried in dust. He followed her out, his steps echoing. She said this was a communication hub long before your time. It connected the first watchers across Earth before the hunters began their purge. He touched the nearest console, its surface cold but alive under his palm. Small sparks rippled across the metal. He asked, "Why did they stop using it?" She said, "Because humanity stopped believing. They let the stories die. They stopped listening to the stars." He thought about that in silence and said, "Then maybe it is time to make them listen again." She nodded and began connecting a series of wires from her pack to the main console as she worked. She said, "You need to understand the price of awakening once the full signal is sent. Every hidden watcher, every sleeping seed, every archive will be exposed, and so will the hunters. They will come not only for you, but for Earth itself." He asked, "Then why start something that could bring war?" She said, "Because war already began long ago. You are only waking up to it." The machines came alive, glowing blue lines spread across the walls, forming a vast map of the planet, each point flickering. Like stars in motion, he stepped closer and saw hundreds of locations shining, some under oceans, others on mountains. He said, "These are all Starborn sites." She said yes, each one tied to a bloodline, each one waiting for the signal to unite them. "You opened the first door. Now we open the bridge." He watched her press a sequence of keys. The air in the room thickened with static. The lights dimmed, and his shoulder burned. As the mark pulsed with rhythm, his breath quickened. The platform in the center began to spin slowly, its edges glowing brighter. Sarah said, "Step onto it and hold steady." He obeyed. Though his legs trembled as soon as his feet touched the platform, he felt the weight of gravity shift. The chamber blurred into a swirl of colors and light, and he was standing in a field of stars, without a ship, without a suit, only surrounded by space. He could breathe, though there was no air. He heard voices in every direction, human voices filled with awe and sorrow and laughter. He saw faces flicker in the starlight, people from every race and time, their eyes meeting his as if they all shared the same memory. Then a figure appeared before him, tall and radiant, wearing armor of light. The figure spoke not in words but in meaning. "We remember you, child of Earth. The Starborn never left. They wait for courage to return." He tried to speak, but the figure placed a hand on his chest, and a surge of energy passed through him. He saw flashes of the past humanity spreading among stars, building cities, then falling apart in civil wars, losing the code that bound them together, drifting back toward the dark. The vision shifted, and he saw the hunters, vast shapes consuming archives, devouring symbols, rewriting truth until whole worlds forgot their past. The figure's voice returned, "They will come for you, but you are not alone. The light that made us still burns within your kind. It only needed one to strike the spark again." He reached out to ask what he should do, but the vision shattered, and he was back in the chamber, falling to his knees, gasping. Sarah was beside him, steadying him. She said it worked. The bridge opened. He looked at the map. On the wall, the lights were brighter, spreading faster across continents. The signal had awakened others, he said. "I saw them all. I saw who we were and what we lost. We cannot let it happen again." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "Then stand and fight for it, because from this point on there is no going back." He rose and wiped sweat from his face, determination hardening inside him. "What now?" he asked. She said, "Now. We prepare the key for full resonance, the final signal that will call the Starborn fleet home. But first you must pass the test of trust." He frowned. "What test?" she said. "You saw the light now. You must face the shadow. The hunters will project illusions drawn from your fear. They will make you doubt what you saw. If your mind breaks, the seed will burn and we lose everything." He took a deep breath. "How do I fight something that is not real?" She said, "By knowing who you are." The platform dimmed, the air shifted, cold and dark shapes began to slide through the walls. His pulse raced. Sarah stood beside him. Calm and still shadows grew, faces formed from mist whispering lies. He heard his mother's voice saying, "You were never chosen. You are sick. You are dreaming." He clenched his fists, trying to shut it out. The whispers grew louder, showing him earth-burning humanity enslaved and his own reflection laughing at him. He shouted no, and drove his palm against the mark on his shoulder. The pain exploded through his body, but the mark blazed with light. The illusions screamed, and burst into dust. The chamber cleared and silence fell. Sarah watched him carefully, her eyes wide. "You resisted," she said. "Few ever do." He stood shaking but alive. "I will not be a puppet. Not of them, not of fate. If the Starborn were human, then humanity can rise without gods?" She looked at him and smiled faintly. "That is what they wanted to hear. That is why you were chosen." He stared at the glowing map again, each light pulsing like a heartbeat, and for the first time he felt not fear but pride. He turned to her and said, "Then we finish this." She nodded and said, "The next node lies under the ocean. We will need allies to reach it. Others like you who have awakened." She handed him a small device like a crystal shard. "This will find them when they come online." He took it, feeling its warmth. It hummed faintly in his hand. The chamber lights faded, leaving only the map above them, casting soft blue light across their faces as they walked back to the tram. He looked once more at the map, glowing like a reflection of the night sky, and whispered to himself, "The stars remember, and this time so will we." The ocean stretched endlessly below them when the small aircraft broke through the thick layer of clouds. The wind howled against the hull, and water sparkled like sheets of glass under the gray sky. Sarah piloted from the front seat, her movements steady and controlled, while he sat behind her, clutching the crystal shard she had given him since leaving the underground hub. The shard had pulsed more frequently with each passing hour, glowing brighter as if calling out to someone he had not yet met. Sarah said over the sound of engines, the shard senses another awakened seed beneath the waves near an old offshore station. We must reach it before the hunters trace the signal. He leaned forward, shouting against the roar. "Why under the ocean?" she said. "Because the second node lies in the deep. The Starborn built their vaults where pressure and silence could hide them from those who feed on thought." When the ship descended toward the surface, he felt his stomach twist as cold mist washed over the cockpit below. He saw a cluster of platforms, rusted and half-submerged waves crashing against the metal towers. Sarah guided the craft between them until they reached a flat landing pad. She shut down the engines, and the silence was almost too loud. Only the distant cry of gulls and the hiss of waves filled the air. She said, "Keep your focus. The hunters will come soon." As she spoke, a sound echoed from one of the towers, a metallic clang followed by footsteps. They both turned, weapons raised, but instead of drones, a man emerged from the fog. His clothes torn, his eyes bright with recognition when he saw the shard in the human's hand. He stopped breathing for a moment, then said, "I knew I was not the only one." He held up his sleeve, revealing a mark on his forearm, glowing faintly blue, just like the mark on the first man's shoulder. Sarah lowered her weapon slightly and said, "Another key found." The newcomer smiled, tired but proud. "My name is Draven. I felt the call 3 nights ago. It nearly tore my mind apart until I followed it here." He looked at the human and asked, "You heard it too?" "Did you?" He nodded. "Yes, and now I cannot stop hearing it." Sarah moved between them. "The node lies below. We descend together." She led them into the tower where a lift waited, half buried in corrosion. It groaned to life as they stepped in, descending through layers of water and metal. The lights flickered, revealing murals carved into the walls. Human figures reaching toward the stars and symbols that matched those on the crystal shard. When the lift stopped, they found themselves in a vast dome filled with faint blue light. Strange plants glowed under glass, and water drifted through cracks like liquid air. At the center of the dome stood a monolith, shaped like a pillar, rising to the ceiling. The hum of its energy echoed through the floor. Sarah said, "This is the ocean node, the second. The network will strengthen once it awakens, but the connection must be shared between 2 keys alone. It will destroy you both." The human looked at Draven, and saw fear and resolve mingled in his eyes. They nodded without words and stepped toward the monolith. The surface of the pillar rippled like water when they touched it. Light spread through the room, the pressure in their heads built until it felt like their skulls would burst. Then everything went silent. They stood together in a vision of the deep ocean where light fell in shafts through dark water and shadows moved far below. A voice rose through the current saying, "You who awaken the second breath must remember unity. The Starborn were never one but many, and it was their division that doomed them." Draven turned to him and said, "It means we have to trust each other. The human said then we do, or none of us survive." The vision cracked apart and they returned to the dome. Gasping, Sarah steadied them as light from the monolith pulsed into the ceiling, shooting upward like a beacon. He said, "It is done." She said, "Yes, but now they know exactly where we are." The entire ocean trembled, a low rumble that grew into a roar. Alarms blared across the old station. "The hunters are here." Sarah shouted. She grabbed Draven by the arm and pulled him toward a side corridor. The human followed as walls shook under impacts from above. They reached a maintenance dock where a submersible lay half buried in cables. Sarah slammed her palm onto the control panel and the craft came alive with a low hum. She yelled inside now as the hatch sealed and the submersible detached from the dock. The water outside exploded in flashes of light. Hunter drones diving through the depths like dark fish with burning eyes. He felt the hull vibrate under hits from energy bolts. Draven shouted back, "Cannot we fight them?" Sarah said, "No. We dive deeper." She forced the vessel into a steep descent, the lights outside fading as pressure built around them. The water grew darker, thicker. The hum of the engine steady but strained through the porthole. He saw shadows circling long and thin with glowing cores. Sarah said, "They are the deep kind. They hunt by sound." She cut the power, plunging them into silence. The vessel drifted in blackness for endless minutes until the sensors stopped blinking. The silence felt alive, like holding breath for the entire world. After a while, she whispered, "They passed. We live for now." The engines reignited, faintly pushing them forward toward a faint glow in the distance as they approached. He saw a city below, half-collapsed towers rising from sand covered in coral and light. A graveyard of another age, Sarah said that was. One of the first Starborn colonies destroyed when the hunters found it, but its core still lives. They can use its energy to cloak themselves. She guided the sub into a hollow dome where soft light surrounded them. Inside were ruins of homes still. Intact toys floating in slow motion underwater, images of humans who had lived here long ago. He pressed his hand against the glass, feeling both wonder and sadness. He said they were just like us. Sarah said they were us, the first ones who left and never returned, but their memory still guards us. He looked at her and said, "Then we will not let them fade." She smiled faintly, then turned serious. "Prepare, we must surface soon and head inland. The third node waits beyond the deserts of the south, and the hunters will not rest until the call is silent again." Draven rested his hand on the crystal shard, still glowing brighter now, with 2 marks linked. He said, "If they come for us, we give them reason to fear the light." The sub rose slowly toward the surface, each meter heavier with purpose, and by the time the first rays of dawn broke through the waves, he no longer felt like a man running. He felt like a man rising. The submersible broke through the waves as dawn spread over the endless sea. Light shimmered across the metal hull and the cold air rushed inside when the hatch opened. He took his first deep breath in hours. The smell of salt filled his lungs, and for the first time since this began, he felt alive again. Sarah stood beside him, scanning the horizon through a thin device shaped like a lens. She said the hunters retreated for now, but they will regroup. The signal from the second node was too strong to hide. It reached far beyond Earth. He looked at her, puzzled. "You mean, they know where Earth is now?" She nodded. "They knew fragments before, but now the pulse drew a line straight to us. And if we cannot wake the third node before they descend, the planet will become a graveyard." He turned to see Draven working on the navigation controls, his hands steady. Though his face pale from exhaustion, he asked how far to the desert. Sarah replied, 1,200 kilometers inland. There is a land route from the coastal ruins where an old rail line still runs. If we reach it before noon, we can cross under their scanners. They docked the sub at a rusted port where old cranes leaned like skeletons. The air was thick with heat, even near the water. The three of them moved quickly through the ruins. The city around them looked like it had been swallowed by time, buildings half buried in sand, streets broken into waves of stone. They found the rail line as the sun climbed higher and followed it into the desert. Their footprints stretched behind them like fading ghosts. As they walked, the wind rose, carrying dust across the horizon. The sand glittered faintly as if mixed with shards of glass. He asked Sarah why the next node was hidden in such a place. She said, "Because this was once a desert, only in name beneath. This sand lies an ocean of data, a starborn archive buried before the Watchers fell. If we open it, the network will not just awaken, it will remember everything." He imagined what that meant and said, "Then, the hunters would do anything to stop us." She said they already have, but they fear one thing: they cannot erase what humans choose to remember. Draven laughed dryly. "Maybe that is why they call us stubborn." Sarah smiled faintly. "Stubbornness is your greatest weapon." When they reached the ridge, at sunset they saw lights flickering in the distance. Small fires surrounded by tents, a settlement built from scavenged metal and old vehicles. Sarah motioned for caution. She said, "These are free bands, nomads who do not trust outsiders, but they still carry old codes. Some might remember the Starborn." He followed her through the camp, eyes watching them from the shadows. A tall woman approached, carrying a spear tipped with blue light. She said, "Strangers do not walk this desert without reason." Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm. "We seek the vault, the one that sleeps beneath the red ridge." The woman froze, her eyes widening. "Where did you hear that?" Sarah lifted her sleeve, showing a mark, glowing faintly silver. The woman's guard lowered a fraction. Then she said, "Follow me," and led them through narrow paths between tents to a cave opening, where cool air drifted up from below. Inside, torches flickered, revealing walls covered in carvings, lines of symbols that matched those on the shard. The woman said, "My people guarded this for generations without knowing why, until the stars began to sing again last night. The sand trembled, and we saw lights in the sky." She looked at the human and said, "You are the reason, are you not?" He nodded. "I think so, though I still do not understand it." She smiled softly. "You will soon." She led them deeper. The tunnel sloped downward into a vast chamber filled with pillars of stone carved with words in a language older than memory. Sarah touched the nearest one, and it responded with a low hum. The chamber brightened, revealing a door made of light. She said, "This is the desert node, and the last line before the bridge to the fleet." He stepped closer, feeling the mark on his shoulder pulse faster. Draven beside him looked nervous. "We open it together, then?" She said, "Yes, but this time the link will not show memories, it will show possibilities. The world that could be, if humanity remembers or forgets." He reached out and the light swallowed them. The desert vanished, replaced by endless landscapes of what could come, cities floating in the air, clean rivers running through green valleys, people of every color and world building together without fear. Then the vision twisted. The same world burned, skies turned black, cities crumbled, and voices cried out under mechanical shadows. He saw the hunters rising like storms, devouring thought, until only silence remained. He fell to his knees, screaming, "Stop!" The images broke apart, leaving him gasping in the sand. Sarah knelt beside him, her tone quiet. That is what the Starborn feared more than extinction. They feared forgetfulness, the moment when no one remembers what freedom means. He looked at the horizon where the sky blazed red with sunset and said, "Then we will not forget. I swear it." The door pulsed again, brighter than before, and a beam shot into the sky, piercing the clouds far above, somewhere beyond the atmosphere. A response came, faint but clear, a deep tone that made the air vibrate. Draven looked up, eyes wide. "They heard us. The fleet heard us." Sarah nodded. "The homeworld code has begun, but so has the countdown. The hunters will come in force before the third sunrise. We must reach the northern range by then." He turned to the nomad woman, who watched in awe. "Will you help us?" She said the desert remembers, and so will we. Her people gathered tools and vehicles, forming a convoy ready to defend the vault. Sarah climbed into one of the transports and looked at him. The time for hiding is over now. Every human must see the truth. He sat beside her as engines roared to life, sand whipping around them. The convoy moved across the night dunes under a sky filled with awakening stars, each one pulsing like a heartbeat of a species that refused to die, and he felt deep inside that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because for the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer silent. It was awake. The convoy thundered across the dunes under a blood-red dawn engines, growling as waves of sand rolled behind them. The wind tore at their faces and the air shimmered with rising heat. Sarah stood in the front vehicle, her eyes scanning the sky through a visor that glowed faintly. She said, "They are coming, the hunters have entered the atmosphere." The human felt the weight of her words and gripped the rail tight behind him. Draven checked the scanner on his wrist. Dozens of red points blinked fast, descending through the upper layers like falling stars. He said, "They will be here in minutes." Sarah turned to the human, her voice clear and steady. "The third node lies at the heart of the northern range. It will complete the call. Once we reach it, you must make the choice." He asked, "What choice?" She said, "Whether to open the full signal or end it. If you open it, the Starborn fleet will arrive and Earth will never be the same. If you end it, the memory will fade again and the hunters will leave, but humanity will stay in darkness. The choice will belong to you, not to them." He looked at the rising mountains ahead, sharp against the horizon, and said, "I will decide when we reach it." The sound of the engines was drowned by thunder as streaks of fire crossed the sky. Hunter dropships burning through the clouds. They hit the sand miles away, sending shockwaves across the desert. Sarah shouted, "Accelerate!" The vehicles pushed faster, roaring up the ridges as heat and dust filled the air. Then one of the hunter craft appeared overhead, sleek black with wings that shimmered like glass. It released a beam that carved through the sand, barely missing their rear vehicle. The blast flipped it into the air and flames erupted. Men and women screamed as Sarah swung the cannon turret on top of the lead truck and fired a burst of blue light. The shot hit the hunter craft and tore off a wing, sending it spiraling down. She shouted, "Keep moving, do not stop." The human climbed beside her, gripping the cannon rail, firing at shadows in the sky. The desert became a storm of light and fire for every hunter that fell. 2 more appeared. The convoy sped between the first mountains as the sun rose, turning the rocks gold and crimson. Sarah guided them toward a narrow valley where tall stone walls rose like ancient towers. She said, "The node is inside that ridge, but we must hold them here, or the activation will fail." The convoy slid to a halt in the valley center. Everyone jumped out, grabbing rifles, shields, and energy rods. Sarah looked at him and said, "The final moment begins. Protect the core until I open the door." He nodded and took position behind a rock, firing at the first drones that poured from the sky. The air burned with heat and metal shards. The nomads fought fiercely, yelling battle cries that echoed against the cliffs. Draven set up a field generator that shimmered like a dome of light, covering them, as the hunters fired beams of energy that struck the shield with crackling sparks. Sarah knelt before the stone wall, pressing her hands against it. The surface rippled and began to glow. She whispered words in the old tongue, the same that filled the chamber under the sea. The mark on her arm and his shoulder both shone like twin stars. A deep rumble shook the valley. The stone cracked open, revealing a vast metallic gate. Light poured out from within. The hunters screamed as if the sound itself hurt them. The human ran to her side, his heart racing. "What do you need?" she said. "Your pulse. The key must feel. Your choice." He placed his hand on the gate and the mark flared. Pain shot through his veins, but he did not pull away. The gate opened wider, showing a chamber of mirrors inside, thousands of glowing threads stretching into infinity. Each thread, a memory each. A voice calling his name. He stepped forward, surrounded by light and sound. Sarah's voice echoed behind him. "The fleet awaits your command. Choose now." He looked into the mirrors, each one showing a future in one. He saw Earth united, building ships and reaching for the stars in another. He saw war between nations over new power. In another, he saw silence and ash. He clenched his fists and said softly, "I will not let others decide for us." He raised his voice. "We choose truth, not control." The mirrors pulsed. The threads merged into one beam that shot upward, breaking through rock and sky, a column of pure light piercing space. The valley shook. Hunters screamed, and their forms dissolved in the radiance. The beam reached orbit and beyond, touching a colossal shape hidden in darkness, a ring-shaped vessel larger than any moon. It turned slowly, answering the call on every screen across Earth, on every radio and every network. A voice spoke, not mechanical, not alien, but human, saying, "We are the Starborn, and we have come home across the planet." People looked up in awe, from cities to deserts, from oceans to mountain peaks. The sky shimmered with patterns of light, forming a map of stars. Draven watched, tears running down his face, and whispered, "They heard us." Sarah stood silent beside the human, her face calm but her eyes full of pride. She said, "The hunters will flee. They cannot live where truth is seen." He asked, "What happens now?" She said, "Now we build again, but not under fear." The gate behind them closed slowly, the mark on his shoulder fading to a soft glow. The battle outside had ended, smoke rising from the dunes as the remaining hunter ships vanished into the sky. The nomads cheered, raising their weapons in triumph. The human looked toward the horizon and saw sunlight spreading over the desert, a new kind of dawn. Sarah walked to him and placed her hand on his arm. "You did what many could not. You chose for your people, not from fear but from belief," he said. "Then stay. Help us rebuild." She smiled gently. That was always the plan. She looked up as a shadow crossed the sun. The ring ship descending slowly through clouds until it hovered high above like a second moon. Its light, gentle, and steady voices filled the air, from every direction, calling themselves homecomers, carrying songs of old Earth, blending with new rhythm across the dunes. The people listened in wonder. He stood there amid the crowd, feeling the pulse of the planet through his feet. The wind carried sand and sunlight and something that felt like hope. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood unhidden, united not by gods or machines but by memory. He turned to Sarah and said, "What now?" she said. "Now we teach them to remember always the ring." Ship glowed brighter, sending threads of light toward the horizon where oceans, forests, and cities reflected it, and the world began to change. He watched it all, the sky alive with color, the air trembling with promise, and whispered the words that would pass into legend. "We are the children of the stars, and we are finally awake."